Hello and good afternoon, and welcome to our final plenary, Riding on the Freeway Transforming Transportation. The automobile industry is in the news every day, and the economic impact of automobile production is globally significant. Because passenger vehicles contribute to climate change, we've seen a revolution over the last decade in how they are powered. As decision makers across sectors, the innovation happening in the auto industry will touch each of us as we lead. And what better place to bring all of this together than here in Detroit, bringing together women leading this change. All right, so hard to see with the lights, but I want a show of hands here. How many of you drive electric vehicles today? Oh, there we go. All right, that's an okay number. How many of you drive hybrids? Oh, wow. All right, a little bit more than I actually would have thought. We're not yet to a zero-emission world, but it looks like we are inching our way there, so that's good. All right, we're going to put a graph up here, and if you take a look at this graph, sales of electric vehicles are trending upward, totaling more than 10 million last year alone. And this trend is accelerating. The International Energy Agency projects that in 2023, so this year, nearly 1 in 5 vehicles sold will be electric. And to give you some perspective on how fast this growth trend is accelerating, last year, 14% of all new cars sold were electric. And that was up from the year before. It was around 9%. And that was up from the year before that in 2020, and that was around 5%. So 5% to 9% to 14%. And when we look out and forecast the next few years, when you get to 2030, the forecast, if you can guess what that might be, the forecast is 44% of new cars sold will be electric. So really a significant acceleration. I know I have concerns, and I think many people have concerns about electric vehicles, and it's those concerns that we're going to talk about here today. The transition to a cleaner power sector that supports and works with the growing number of EVs on the road today, as well as the supply chains that ensure we can keep meeting demand for those EVs. And we're going to begin this exploration of this very important and nuanced topic with the CEO of Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E Corp., Patti Poppe. Patti is wonderful. She is the CEO of California's largest utility. They serve about 16 million people in one of the world's largest economies, and they're very much helping to lead the state's clean energy future. And very notably, very importantly, Patti is the first female executive to serve as the CEO of not only one, but 2 Fortune 500 companies. So please join me in welcoming Patti to the panel. Hello, Patti. Welcome to the IWF. I'm so excited to be up here, having you here.
Thanks.
And I've wanted to use this word, and I don't know if it's accurate, but somebody tried this earlier. Would you consider yourself a Michigander?
Michigander.
Michigander?
Through and through. We're all my Michiganders in the house.
So you spent a lot of your life here in Michigan, and you did spend your early career here in Michigan.
Yes.
So why don't you share a little bit about your background here in Michigan?
Well, happy to. Michigan's definitely home and always will be. I grew up here in Michigan. First 15 years of my career were at General Motors. So here we are in the Renaissance, so that's exciting. And then I went to DTE Energy, and I think there might be some DTE people in the house. And then ultimately ended up at Consumers Energy, CMS Energy, over in Jackson in my hometown. My dad had retired from Consumers. I grew up in Jackson. It was such an honor to go back home and be the CEO of CMS Energy. And I worked at CMS for 10 years before taking the call to PG&E out in California.
And that was in early 2021, and you stepped into the CEO role at a time when PG&E had just emerged from bankruptcy after a few, I think, very tragic events. I believe it was still in the pandemic. What compelled you to step into the CEO role at that point in time?
Yeah, I truly felt called to serve. All of us in the industry were watching what was happening at PG&E and what was happening in California with the effects of climate change, and wildfires were so devastating. And I watched the effects on both the customers of PG&E and the people of California and the people who worked at PG&E. And I know that it can be better than that. And so the board chair, when he was making his pitch, because I was pretty happy at CMS Energy, I gotta tell you, all my CMS friends in the house, I mean, my goodness, it's a wonderful place.
Oh, you have a lot of friends in the house.
Yeah,
Yesterday when I was talking to a number of people here, we were talking about this, and I brought up your name. Oh, Patti Poppe.
Yeah, well, I definitely am a hometown girl for sure. But my board chair, my now board chair, said to me, "Listen, Patti, you can't sit in that easy chair of yours. You're too young." And which I was flattered. Of course, he knew how to do that. But he said, "You've got one more in you, and consider this your professional final exam." And I do feel like that is what it is. Everything I've learned, and it's interesting. Our topic today, the intersection of electric vehicles and energy. It's so interesting. My career is basically equally split between automotive and energy, and so I find myself in this really unique position, especially out in California. You were sharing some of your EV statistics. You said 14% of new vehicles sold last year were electric vehicles. Well, in my service area, which is about 2/3 of California, 23% were electric vehicles. And we are definitely experiencing the energy transition in California, and so no better place to bring automotive and energy together than at PG&E.
Yeah, no doubt. When you stepped into the role as CEO, when you look at the last couple of years, and you think about the things that you had to do from a leadership standpoint, what type of leadership style did you adopt, or did you feel like you had that from consumers coming into PG&E?
Well, I think there's some important context setting about PG&E for the people in the audience who are not familiar, but PG&E had gone through a very devastating era, honestly. There was a significant pipeline incident, and 8 people and an entire community was destroyed. Fast forward 7 years later, and the wildfires really started happening, and there was multiple years with wildfires culminating in the most devastating of all, the Camp Fire in 2018, where 84 people died as a result of electric equipment that ignited a fire that was extraordinarily catastrophic. PG&E ultimately pled guilty to 84 counts of manslaughter. We were under probation. The company had gone through bankruptcy, and it needed to be saved, and it needed to be transformed, and it needed to create a model of service. And I will say my time at both DTE and consumers really taught me how important customer service was, how important customer centricity was. And, you know, my main theme is leading with love. And I felt like the people of PG&E and the customers that we serve needed a lot of love and some real healing. And I felt uniquely equipped to take on the incredible challenge. And I'm almost 3 years in now, and I'm so grateful for my team and everything we've achieved, but we've made some significant progress, and we are nowhere near done. We've not anywhere close to satisfied, but definitely feeling like our main foundation of safety is dramatically improved.
So you talk a lot about
Thank you.
leading and managing through crisis, and you have experienced a lot of that. You're now addressing the first order impacts of climate change, and climate change in and of itself is a crisis and a long-term crisis. I don't know if everyone is familiar with PG&E's service area or not, but it's really at the epicenter of climate change. You've experienced heat waves, floods, wildfires, heavy rains.
Yeah, people say the weather is so great in California. I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, but for the mudslides, the earthquakes, the wildfires, and the drought. Besides that, it's great. The weather's fantastic.
I'm from Texas. I know what you mean. Anyway, but when you're dealing with those types of things, how do you lead through that? What do you have to think about to lead through those sorts of events?
Well, we've got a lot of science, I can tell you that. And innovation. We have the opportunity to reimagine how energy is delivered. You know, I remember one day I was driving through a really significant mountain canyon with one of my colleagues, and I was looking out the window and looking at the power lines through this mountain canyon, and I was imagining when they first set those power lines and what it was like. And then it occurred to me that if Thomas Edison were to join me and visit one of our substations, it would look Oh, very
exactly the same.
familiar.
I'm in the business. I know what you mean.
And I thought, you know, what once was the lowest cost way, the point-to-point delivery of energy delivered to customers was the lowest cost way to energize our most rural communities. It modernized our society. What worked then is not going to be what works now. And so I say Thomas Edison would recognize most of the stuff, but not for long. And it's a really exciting time to reimagine how energy is delivered. And it might not be wireless, but I do believe it'll be significantly less wires. And for us, in particular parts of our service area, wires are a hazard, an actual threat to the well-being. We announced a major 10,000-mile undergrounding campaign, which at first caught people by surprise, but when you understand the actual conditions within which we're operating, there's no other alternative but to bury those lines, and so that customers don't have to choose between being safe and having power. We need resilient, climate-resilient infrastructure in more and more states across the country, and we actually are learning from people in Europe, and particularly Germany, where they did a major undergrounding program for transmission from the offshore wind to their population centers. There's much we can learn from the world, and we need to, so that our infrastructure can be not only climate change thwarting, but actually adaptive to new and more extreme weather conditions.
Yep, that's a huge program bearing. How long? 10,000 miles of lines? Is that what I remember?
Yeah, 10,000.
Something like that.
10,000 miles of line.
Yeah.
I talk about it every day. A lot of
I've heard
people
that.
convinced.
So when you think about a regulated utility, and quite frankly, at a lot of our companies that we work at, and safety is really a big deal. And so much of what you're working on at PG&E today aims at prioritizing safety for the customers. And I read a little bit about how you guys have gotten so much better about being able to shut off power, when some event happens to help prevent wildfires, et cetera. But shutting off power in a high-risk area may end up creating another safety hazard in a vulnerable community. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So our public safety power shutoff program is something that when I was operating a utility in Michigan, I couldn't have even imagined proactively shutting off the power to customers. But in our conditions, we must. And we've modernized our thought process and technology about that. The reality is we have taken my entire service area and broken it into 2-kilometer blocks. We call them polygons. And in every one of those polygons, we know the wind speed, the moisture levels, the fuel levels, any tree that would be within strike distance of the line. We know that. We know if we have a maintenance inspection we've done but haven't done the repair yet. We know that. And so just a couple weeks ago, we held our second public safety power shutoff this year. And it was... we were able to target it. We've sectionalized the system so much we could target it to 1,000 people. The first year we did public safety power shutoffs, we did one for 1 million people at one time. It was very upsetting. It was very, a blunt instrument. Now we have it extremely data-driven, science-based, so we can really target and keep people safe. But one of the things that you just said, Janet, that's so important is that there are people, and we know them, who live on equipment. So we call those medical baseline customers. We know precisely in every one of those 2-kilometer blocks how many of those people are. We know their address, we know what they need, and we make sure that they have backup power resources. But as I was getting up to speed, making a kind of a full circle GM moment, I have 2 funny Mary Barra stories I'll just tell real quick. First, when I took the job, I called Mary Barra. I'm going to come back to your question, by the way.
Yeah, I'm not sure where we're going with
Eventually, I'll
this,
get
but-
there. But I called Mary because I remember, if those of you from Detroit will remember, when Mary took the job at General Motors, it was a trying time for GM, and she was a brave woman to take that role and has done a beautiful job. But I called her, and I thought she might have some advice for me. She said, well, I'll tell you what Warren Buffett told me. I was like, okay. That seems good. But she said, make it safe and do it fast. And so that became my mantra. We're going to make it right, and we're going to make it safe. And we really leaned into that. But then she said, but call me if there's anything that General Motors can do to help, which was just so Mary of her. So a few months later, when I figured out this power safety shutoff business, I called her, and said, Mary, here's the deal. I have 15,000 customers who are medical baseline customers in our high fire threat areas, and I have to proactively shut off the power to keep them safe. I need 15,000 bidirectional charging Chevy Bolts off lease that I can buy and use the power from the car to power their homes. And she said, we're on it. Let's do it. Like, she didn't call a meeting. She didn't have a committee. She didn't call the board. That's right. So amazing. She said, listen, safety's our top priority, and she knew safety was my top priority, and so we've been working together side by side ever since, and I'm happy to also say that we're working also with Ford and BMW and Tesla to have power where people need it. And we've got a lot more to say. I know Lisa's going to join us.
I was going to say,
Good
this
time.
is the perfect moment. This is the perfect moment. It's terrific. We could go on for hours here. But we are, given the time frame, we are going to transition now. And we're going to talk with the woman who is leading the charge at Ford Motor Company. She is Vice President of EV Industrialization. She knows this industry inside and out. She has served as Ford's Chief Operating Officer here in North America. So please, let's welcome Lisa Drake. Hello, Lisa.
Hi, how
And
are you?
great. Welcome to the IWF. We have such a powerhouse here on the stage with these two, no doubt. And we can really get just a macro view of everything around this zero-emission world. But why don't we start out with you on what you do at Ford, what your role is at Ford, and a little bit of your background.
Sure. Well, it's really great to be here. So I've been at Ford 29 years. I grew up in Pittsburgh, but I came here right out of college. And, oh, we got a Pittsburgh fan. All right. Go Steelers. So came right out of college and started at Ford Motor Company. And honestly, I fell in love with Detroit, frankly, when I interviewed. I remember leaving the airport, and there was the big Uniroyal tire on I-94, and there was the Henry Ford Museum, and the Ford Oval was on all the buildings. And I just thought, you know, this place is a community. I'm not going to go work for a company. I'm going into like a community. So I've been here 29 years, a variety of roles. I will tell you, by far, this is my favorite role I've ever had in my career. My role is I'm responsible for what we call industrializing our EV plan. That means finding all of the assembly plants around the globe where we will build our EV products, all the battery plants that we need, the supply chain, nickel, lithium, graphite, cathode plants, anode plants, inverters, e-drives, chargers, all those fun things that make up EVs. So it's quite challenging, but it's probably one of the most rewarding times in my career.
And so in your role, how do you interact with power companies?
Oh boy, well, we can't drive the car without the power companies, so they're immensely important. And you know, many years ago, probably even 10 or 11 years ago, at Ford, we were dreaming of these concepts of smart meters. You know, we hadn't had the ability yet to talk to the home or talk to the grid or talk to the utility companies, you know, with our vehicles. And now we can. You know, the utility companies have really enabled the opportunity for the automakers and our vehicles to actually talk to the grid and talk to the utility companies. And now there's this symbiotic relationship that if we continue to work together, we can make it easier, better for the planet, for the customers, for people to be able to adopt EVs and be able to charge them in the manner that they need, whether it's at home or on the road. Bidirectional capability is a big deal, as Patti mentioned. You know, our F-150 Lightning, it's our pickup truck, has that capability, and we hear time and time again how people love having the ability to use that energy that they're storing in their truck to power different things in their lives, power their homes when they need to, and hopefully someday we can really use it to balance the grid and load shed and help Patti do what she wants to do.
Yeah, there's no doubt, and Ford's been amazing, Lisa. I just have to tell you, you and Jim are doing an incredible job. Ford brought the Lightnings out to California with us. We've got those first couple plugging into the grid and making sure we've got everything tested and ready to go. And just to give some perspective of the volume that we're talking about, I have a nuclear power plant in California called Diablo Canyon, and it's 2,200 megawatts, and it provides the energy for about 8% of the population in the state of California. So it's a huge power plant at 2,200 megawatts. Today, on the roads, in my service area, not even the charts that you showed, Janet, but in my service area today, we have 9,000 megawatts of capacity in the form of electric vehicles driving around the roads today. 9,000, that's 4 plus of those Diablo Canyon power plants. It's an incredible opportunity to share, and I'd love to just say a little bit more about that.
Keep on going.
Okay, I'm going to just geek out for just a little bit
I'm
because I think it's so
right.
interesting. Maybe if you can cue the slide, please. We have, in fact, I get asked all the time, is the grid ready for all these electric vehicles? Like we have power outages, wind, ice storms, in our case, massive weather events in California. Is the grid ready? Well, let me show you why not only is the grid ready for EVs and everything that Lisa's up to, but the grid needs what Lisa's up to. So if you look at this chart posted here, you can see, is it above my head too? Oh yeah, good. So you can see this is a typical day in PG&E service area. And what's interesting about this, if you look at the day, the hours of the day, and the vertical axis is power demand. It drops way off in the middle of the day because we have so much rooftop solar in California. We have excess supply. Excess capacity. In fact, and this is not that unusual, most places in the world have a dip between their peak usage and their lowest usage in the day. A lot of times people think there's extra power at night because the lights are off and the factories aren't running, that kind of thing. So yeah, there is extra power at night. But in fact, for us in California, and as more solar is deployed, we have extra power in the middle of the day. Now here's one scenario of the future. So imagine this yellow is the power of the future with all the EVs. And what happens if all those EVs are charging and acting like they are today? Well, that means we'll have excess demand on the peak hours of the day. That could be very expensive because that means we'll have to build the grid bigger than it is today. And in fact, some people, Elon Musk is famous for forecasting that demand for electricity is going to grow 3 times as we transition to electric transportation. Well, if we had to rebuild the grid 3 times bigger, that would be very expensive. But let me show you an alternative future that we're standing for and working with Ford and General Motors and Tesla on creating. This green line, we believe, is the load curve of the future. We're going to be able to charge those cars in the middle of the day. So if you see the vehicles, imagine that middle of the day is when we're actually fueling the vehicles. In California today, that power oftentimes is free. We're actually exporting it, paying people to take the power because we've got too much energy midday. Imagine being able to fuel your car for free and then turn around and serve the peak with that vehicle. And when I say that, some people say, well, I don't want to come out in the morning and not have energy in my car because I serve the grid. Well, no. This is how it would work. Maybe 5-10 days a year, we would send an advance notice and say the grid's going to be tight tomorrow, because that's actually how it works. It isn't tight every day. It's tight a handful of days a year. And imagine then being paid for the energy in your car at your choice to opt in, and you then as a vehicle owner provide power back to the grid and prevent us from building out that grid 3 times bigger. I call that decarbonizing the economy at the lowest societal cost. We can actually afford to do this because EVs make it possible. They're little mini power plants right where the people are, and they can be optimized and distributed. And so when I talk about less wires, this is what I'm talking about. The power is going to be at your house. This is the future. It's happening in California today. It's happening in Europe today. It will happen across the nation and across the world.
And is this how you're thinking about charging infrastructure?
Exactly how we're thinking about charging infrastructure.
I didn't think somebody could geek out on this topic more than
You know,
me,
I'm
and
sitting here, I feel like a proud
somebody-
mama up here. Lisa, what do you think about this?
Well, I mean, it's what we've been dreaming of. I mean, this is the future, and it's why these partnerships are so important to be able, so that we design our vehicles that can work with the grid, that can work with Patti's communication systems. And by the way, You know, I drive a Mach-E. It's probably between 270 and 280 miles on a full charge. I charge at home almost all the time. And if I got a notice, or my son drives a Mach-E, my big mistake was not putting 2 chargers in my garage. I only put 1. But and if he were given a choice to sell a little bit of energy back overnight, and he knew he was only going to drive to school and back the next day, he'd probably do it in a heartbeat. I mean, these are the things. This is the next generation, and that's how they're going to think about this. And so I think it's a fabulous idea, and I don't even think it's an aspiration. I think it's really going to happen.
So let's follow up on that a little bit. When we think, in fact, I think Mary Kramer even said it, when people think about buying their first EV or adopting EVs, there is a fear, and I've got that fear, and I have not moved to an EV yet, but there's a fear called
You do live
range.
in Texas, Janet.
Yes, I know. I was reminded about that earlier. Range anxiety. You know, there's a real fear that you're just going to run out of power with your battery before you get to your destination. Talk a little bit about maybe where batteries are right now, and the change in batteries and long-lasting batteries going forward.
Sure, and I mean, there's always going to be battery advancements, but I think what most people don't realize, and what we found now, we have three pretty major products out on the road. We have our Mustang Mach-E, we have our F-150 Lightning, and if you know Ford and trucks, it's a big deal for us. And then we have a van, a commercial van called Transit. And what we learned fairly quickly is that once people get into an EV, they don't want to go back. It's almost like when we had our flip phones and the first people who got those smartphones, and they had the screen and there was no keyboard, and you're like, oh my God, I'm never going to type on a screen, and that's crazy. But once you try it, then all of a sudden it made your flip phone look like obsolete. And once you drive an EV, and just the smooth experience, the ability to not have to ever go to the gas station, you're always full tank every night if you plug in at home, and then the digital experience tends to surround the EVs. They're a lot different than ICE or internal combustion engine. People don't go back. So once they get in one, they don't go back. That's number one. Number two, they realize that range anxiety isn't as much of an anxiety, because many households in the US predominantly do have an ICE and an EV. And so that anxiety, just like our household, my husband drives a Lincoln Navigator, and he loves it. That's what he wants, because he has a lot of things he hauls around. And so on long trips, we take the Navigator. On the short trips, we take the Mach-E. But even we can go up north to Traverse City in my Mach-E. We go to Chicago in my Mach-E. We can go to Pittsburgh in my Mach-E. We stop one time to charge. We get a cup of coffee. We go use the restroom, and away we go. So for us, it's about getting people into the cars. Once you get in, you love it, and then that range anxiety starts to go away. And they're not for everyone. Like, we know we're not there betting that 100% of the market will be EV in the next few years. But if you're not ready for that curve when it comes, it can be catastrophic as a company to not be prepared for that adoption. And so that's the approach we take. We're going to be ready. We're going to have choice for people who want to be in an EV. But if you don't, that's okay. We have another product for you too.
All right, well, let's go back. And Patti, this one's going to be for you. You talked a little bit about the electricity grid, and I know you're looking to build the electricity grid of the future, and with the demand from EVs being a part of that. But talk a little bit more. We talked about private-public partnerships, et cetera. Talk a little bit more about investment in what we need for the grid of the future.
Yeah, so at the grandest scale, we need to make sure that we have the transmission and distribution system delivering energy where it will be utilized. And then we need this opportunity at the localized level to create the resilience that we all want. And I think there's two key points I'd like to make about this. Number one, I think the idea of your vehicle not only getting you from A to B, but then putting power back to your house. I was so excited when I first saw those Lightning commercials, Lisa. It's just so useful. It's useful to have backup power resources in the event of extreme weather. What a great opportunity that is. But what I think is really interesting is the deflationary effects, in a positive way, of electric vehicles and all of that infrastructure that we can build. As we transition from gasoline as a fuel to electricity, electric motors are more efficient. Electric motors for the unit of energy for unit of energy, you get more energy from electricity than from petroleum-based fossil fuels. So as we transition globally from a household, if you imagine your household energy wallet being perhaps natural gas for heating, electricity for your typical electric uses, and then gasoline to power your vehicle, when that whole stack turns into electricity, and I know people, all the Europeans in the house, you know how expensive natural gas has become and what a risk natural gas has become combined with gasoline in the vehicle. When you transition home heating and transportation to electricity, the whole world will spend less on energy. So we can actually decarbonize the economy at a lower societal cost than today. People talk a lot about all the infrastructure you have to build and how expensive it is to transition. It actually can be more affordable for the world to go to electricity as a primary fuel source. There are some applications where electricity doesn't work, it's not everywhere, but in a typical household, that transition could be, in Europe, a 50% reduction in energy cost. In the United States, depending where, California is going to look a lot more like Europe, but anywhere from 30 to 50% household reduction in energy spend when we transition to carbon-free, emission-free transportation and home heating.
And when you think about EVs for that, don't you have a term for that? Isn't that anyways economics?
Anyways
Something
economics,
like that?
that's what I call it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I call the electrification of transportation as a resilience. It's free because it's anyways economics. You bought the car for the car. But then to have the car as a resilience play and then the peak supply on a hot summer day, it's an extraordinary use of existing assets. It's fully utilizing existing assets. Therefore, the unit cost of every kilowatt sold goes down as you utilize it for more purposes.
Yes, and then it's infinite because these batteries, if we do our jobs right, are recyclable. So it's not like you're not continuing to extract and extract
Great
and extract
point.
and extract. At some point, this becomes a complete closed loop ecosystem for the planet because these batteries now can be recycled and put right back into the economy, and you're reusing that kilowatt hour capacity over and over and over again. So once you build that ecosystem, then it's our responsibility to keep it closed loop and keep recycling it.
And it sounds so exciting about thinking about this and looking forward, but to bring it back to reality just a little bit, thinking about the supply chain and everything that has to happen in order to get to where we all think we want to go and where it's probably going to go. And we think about batteries and we think about critical minerals, and it's called critical minerals for a reason because they are critical to so many things as part of this energy transition. When you think about Ford and how you guys are trying to situate yourself with the supply chain, you think about lithium, you mentioned it, lithium, cobalt, nickel, all the other critical minerals and metals. You find that in so many parts of the world. However, the mining and the processing of that is still pretty much dominated by China. How are you guys trying to situate yourselves in order to sort of get control of your supply chain and really be sure that you have access on time to what you need to have the batteries in order to produce the EVs?
Yeah, there's no doubt it presents a challenge, but first and foremost at Ford, our environmental and social responsibilities and what we take seriously is very unwavering. They're a foundation of the Ford brand around the world, and we always start there when we talk about how we're going to source our critical minerals. China does have a significant dominance in this space. I would say early on, so nickel, something called lithium hydroxide or lithium carbonate, and then graphite most recently are sort of the three big ones you have to worry about in this space. We solved nickel very early on, so we had our supply figured out on nickel that was non-China based, and we spent a lot of time on lithium hydroxide and carbonate. And I will tell you, the Ford brand, and I mentioned this to Bill Ford, we were in a board meeting, and we have a sustainability committee as part of our board. And our sustainability committee on our board, I mean, they are incredibly engaged, they're very strict, and they've been that way for decades at Ford. And they have preserved the Ford brand so well through that governance that when I went out as a supply chain executive to look for critical minerals, a lot of the players wanted to work with Ford because they knew we would elevate their own ESG standards and make them a better player in the world too. They trusted our brand. Our brand has global recognition, and it mattered because in a lot of cases, the governments around the world control the reserves, and the governments want to work with a reputable, trusted company, in some cases an American company specifically, and that brand power at Ford really allowed us to do a lot of work that I don't think other companies may have. So we have arrangements with some of the largest lithium producers on the planet. They have very low carbon CO2 footprint. They have very high ESG standards. They're operating today, which means we don't have a risk of supply disruption. And now we're working on graphite. So it's a global puzzle. But I have to thank frankly the stewards of the Ford brand over the decades, because they are what are allowing us now to go out and do the work we need to do.
And you're looking at that supply chain and sort of shoring that up. You're looking at that both internationally, but you're also looking at it domestically, if I remember that correct. Aren't you focused on some of the, I think, what we call junior miners here in the U.S. and Canada?
Yes, there are some smaller, we're just starting to get back to our roots of an industrial nation. It's interesting to think about like what we can do as a United States if we really go back to the times when the Thomas Edisons and the Henry Fords and the Rockefellers, but we have investments in some of the smaller junior mines out west, so Compass Minerals, Ioneer, ESM, but they have a lot of work to do. They have development work on extraction and some technical diligence they still have to perform. And we couldn't wait for that. So we have both, I would say, larger agreements and then some smaller juniors we invest in.
Yeah, and when you think about, you say, you didn't have to wait for that, or when you think about policy and legislative mandates, and think about the U.S. and the legislative things that have happened over the last couple years to really be a catalyst for the growth in EVs or transmission or where the money comes from, and you're seeing that at jurisdictions all around the world. There's tailwinds right now for a lot of this.
I mean, there's no doubt for us, the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act and all the climate provisions that were in there were a huge stimulus for us. It's creating a lot of jobs in the United States that otherwise would not be here. There's technology investments that are now happening in the U.S. that otherwise wouldn't. And I feel like the U.S. finally caught up with some of the global policy making that existed elsewhere.
Yeah, I was in Davos not long after IRA had been passed, and the global community was definitely amazed at what America had done.
I think we were amazed.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a whole funny story I could tell about that, but I'm going to skip it. But I'll just say this, that I think the IRA will be a key catalyst for investment in a cleaner energy future, and the upfront cost has such a dramatic payback, an absolute economic payback, not a kind of philosophical, yes, it's accretive for the planet. Yes, it will help us save and heal our planet, and it will be economically viable. And that's the part that I think makes it, I consider myself a climate optimist because I can actually see the pathway to where we're headed, and the parts are real. And the work that Ford's doing is a key part of enabling that.
Yeah, absolutely. And these legislative mandates, they cross all sectors, all different types of technologies. And when you think about EVs, and I can't remember the percentage that GHG emissions around EVs. It's 3%, 6%, somewhere in there. How important, in the whole scheme of things, how important is it that we move forward and we adopt EVs? How important are EVs in the whole scheme of everything?
Well, yeah, it's essential. It truly is essential. If you want to do your part, Janet, we're going to get you in an EV. I can just see. I think she'd look good in that lightning. Come on, she can get away with a pickup truck.
I realize that sitting down.
Look good. But in all seriousness, being able to offset and reduce the peak demand while we're fully utilizing existing assets it is truly the pathway to a lower societal cost to a decarbonized economy. It is not a pipe dream, but EVs play a very fundamental and exciting role. I think the future of mobility is as different and unique as the future of producing energy.
How about you, Lisa? Obviously, you're a believer.
Oh, yeah, I mean, why not? If you can buy an EV, and at some point they will be at the same price as an ICE, and they're not all there today, but they're also not the full market yet today. But they will be, and there's plenty of choices and plenty of options out there. And if you can choose that, and if you can do your small part in decarbonizing the planet, and if you can get a better driving experience, and you can get a better digital experience, and you never have to go to the gas station, and you don't have to change your brake pads as much because you don't use your brakes, they're regenerative, and there's these and. You don't change engine oil, you don't change filters.
And you power your house.
And you can power your house, and you go to your
for goodness
tailgate. I
sake.
mean, the question is, actually, why would you buy an ICE? That's the question,
Yeah.
right? Now,
That is-
and now we're a truck company. There are some instances where people need big trucks to do their jobs. They have to build America too. So, we are in that space. But for people who want to be in the EV, we have one.
Well, and the good news is, we, at least in my service area and definitely in parts of Europe, there have been enough EV adoption that the used EV market is really taking shape. And we have incentives in our service area, $4,500 discount, an incentive for a used EV. And if you're buying a $12,000 used EV with a $4,500 discount, now we're not leaving anyone behind. We can have an equitable, clean energy transition. And that whole life cycle of electric vehicles, they last longer because they don't have as many moving parts. It truly creates a pathway for everyone to participate in the clean energy transition.
And I'm going to leave this on one last question. I'll give each of you the mic, and then I've got something. What makes you excited about the future?
Oh boy. Well, for me personally, I took a crack at this EV adoption. I was fortunate enough in my career about 12 years ago. I was the chief engineer of what we call our first battery electric vehicle. It was a Ford Focus. And at the time, California had something called the ZEV mandate. So you had to sell a certain percentage of vehicles in the market that were zero emissions. And I remember, GM had the EV1, and I remember watching the movie documentary Who Killed the Electric Car, and it was this whole movement, and it was a word that it was called this disruptive movement back in like 2009, 2010. And there was a funny story someone had come into my office, a battery engineer, and said, hey, there are these guys out in California, and they're using like laptop cell batteries, and they're making something called a Roadster. And I was like, what? And I said, okay, well, find out what they're doing. And long story short, we benchmarked these guys as we were doing our Focus electric vehicle, and obviously those guys were Tesla. But it's funny to look back now and see how far we've come.
Yeah.
But we've done this only in 10 years. Like in the world of what we have ahead of us and the world that was behind us, within 10 years, we went from really trying this to, at Ford Motor Company, 5 battery plants globally, 2 million unit ramp in. I mean, a customer base now that we're so proud to have between the Mach-E's and the Lightnings, and it's just maybe in 8 to 10 years, that was it.
Yeah.
So that's what's so exciting is like a lot of people's dreams are starting to come true.
Right. And Patti, how about you?
Well, I'm going to bring it full circle. At PG&E, we're experiencing the true effects of climate change. And in California, I wear a little ladybug on my jacket every day as a reminder and in memory of a little girl who died in a forest fire. Climate change is real. It has devastating effects. And all of us have to do our part. We all have to move faster. We all have to do more. And I know I've dedicated my life to it, but we're making the pathway available to everyone, and that's what makes me excited.
Thank you. And I don't think there's any better way to end this panel than on that. The one thing I will say is that you brought up Tesla. You talked about Elon. And Patti is very well known for wanting to take selfies all the time. So I brought my phone, and I'd like to stand up and take a selfie with all the IWF
If you will, can we
members.
lift the house lights by any chance? This is a pro move here. There we go. Thank you.
There we go.
There we go.
All right, let's do it. Well, actually, you got your phone? You take it.
Here, I'll go in the middle. How about
You
that?
know,
Oh,
there we
you guys,
go. I don't know if
Okay, everybody, give us a good wave.
let's say EVs,
There we go.
not
Oh.
cheese, EVs.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, that's so nice.
All right, thank you
so much.
guys.